Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming to the round table. And in case any of you were not there yesterday, I'll say 3 or 4 words about what we're doing here. These 2 days are called the musical, in parentheses, Ethics Lab number 3, which is part of a research project entitled Musical, in Klammern, Improvisation and Ethics. And this is a 4-year research project, which is led by the trio on this side of the stage. My name is Christopher Williams. I'm a musician and artistic researcher. This is my colleague Caroline Gatt, an anthropologist. This is my colleague philosopher Joshua Bergamin. And we're working on this long project in order to investigate the improvisational qualities of ethical practices and phenomena, not only in music, but across a range of human activity, and focusing on music as case studies for that project. We'll talk a little bit more, I guess, about what these terms mean. Improvisation and ethics, and probably music will come up at one point or another. But today we're sort of, as a trio, in the background. We're happy to be moderating a roundtable where our guests will be in the foreground, and they are the philosopher Mike Wheeler, 3 members of the Klingt collective with whom we've been working for the last week and who, of course, are performing the concert. That's Angélica Castelló, Dieb 13, and Noid Haberl. And finally, we have a second external guest, Deniz Peters, artistic researcher and musician from the Kunstuni Graz. I forgot to say that Mike Wheeler is also a professor at the University of Stirling. And this will be a fairly open discussion. If you get excited, feel free to pipe up at any time. But I think we'll first start out with a few solos from the rest of the panel and then segue into a discussion organically. So, do we have any first volunteers about who would like to riff on this topic of musical improvisation and ethics?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'd like to talk a little bit about some themes that come up in my own research. As mentioned, I'm a philosopher, but I'm actually a philosopher of cognitive science and philosopher of psychology. One of the things I'm interested in is how groups of people solve problems in various contexts. So sometimes I find myself talking about sports teams, particularly at the moment, but at other times I find myself talking about music and talking about musical groups, musical ensembles. So this is a very exciting project for the kinds of things I'm interested in. And I'll just say a couple of things, actually, that were inspired by some things that the musicians said last night in the question and answer session that followed the concert last night. So one of the things that people focus on often when they think about improvisation in music, in groups, in collectives, is the issue of respect. You'll often hear people when they're interviewed, musicians interviewed, they'll talk about how they couldn't do this kind of improvisational work without having respect between the musicians. And I'm really interested in this particular concept. And one of the things that's interesting is often this notion of respect is played out in terms of something like having a history that builds up a sort of sense of trust between the musicians. So having a history together as players. And one of the really kind of exciting things I think about this project is that very notion is going to be tested, because the collective that we're going to hear perform later tonight, in the second phase of this project, will be joining up with first 1 and then 2 more improvisational orchestras, with whom, of course, they don't have that kind of shared playing history. It'll be really interesting to see how much that notion of trust gets disrupted under those kind of circumstances in the run-up to the performances and the performances. I think what's also really interesting is that when people talk about improvising music, they often talk about what's created by the group, what's shared by the group was mentioned last night. And often, we might think about what's shared by a more conventional kind of music playing as something like the song or the score or something like that. But here that's not the case. And it was really exciting last night to hear the musicians sometimes talk about themselves as a kind of self-organizing sort of dynamical system that produces these emergent structures that are that take place within a set of constraints that they set for themselves at the start of the performance, but beyond that are created by the interactions between the individual musicians, each of whom is making these very local improvisatory decisions as they play. So we get this idea of what's shared by the group is this emergent structure, a kind of self-organized structure that's produced by all these complex local actions and interactions between and by the musicians. And that's one way of thinking about what's shared by the group. Another way of thinking about it, this is the last thing I'll mention, what is how to sort of, in that you don't see the ethical, you don't hear the ethical. Where's this notion of respect coming along at this moment? Well, one of the interesting things here is that there is an ethical dimension to this, because another way of thinking about what's shared by the group, I think, might be a kind of sense of how the collective think about themselves, how they think about, in sort of more, in less loaded terms, what they do. And I guess what I think is that in collectives such as this, and this is something that would have to be tested empirically and might be denied by the very people on my right now. But one of the things that might be interesting to think about that group sense of who they are, what they produce, as what they do, as a kind of ethical ideal that the group kind of adheres to. And that as the music is produced in this really fascinating self-organized way, that the musicians are somehow kind of responding to that, evaluating what's being produced as something that matches, that flows from what they are, what they do, that represents them as this collective. And I think that's another thing that might interestingly be tested when the collectives work with each other, when the different orchestras work with each other. Will those senses that the different combinations have, different collectives have, different orchestras have, that sense that each of them have who they are, how will that interact? How will that combine in these circumstances where the different units work together? So I think there's sort of some of the really interesting issues that come up when we think about ethics and improvisation, inspired by what I heard discussed last night, which is really fascinating. And secondly, just looking a little bit forward to some things that are going to happen in this project later and how some of those themes might play out. Thank you.
So, yeah, I'm Angélica Castelló, and I'm part of this nice group. Musician and composer, but basically a phrase, a sentence I like a lot from Varese. He called himself a sound organizer, so I'm kind of more in that idea. So where everything is just about putting sounds together in any situation. And yeah, we did this week. I mean, we have, for me, thinking about ethics. Let's say this week for me opened many questions and didn't give answers yet, but I guess it's for everybody like this. For example, now if you pronounce a word which was in this week for me not present in the vocabulary, which is respect. And I have to think about this a lot now. Because well, we have to define the word respect. One of our colleagues was using a lot, he was playing a lot with the word trust. I prefer that word because I think it's as well a thing of aesthetic. And I think in how you say, in a music, there should be as well ugliness, disrespect, and a bit of horror, and not only happiness. For me, and I think I share this quite a lot with most of my colleagues in this ensemble, which is like, it depends, but it's aesthetic which I like. I like things which are not beautiful. So respect is something very dangerous because I want people to be disrespectful as well, my colleagues. And this is more like you have to trust that this disrespect is nothing to be taken personal. Maybe it's not always possible, but yeah, but that the ugly things are allowed to happen, or sometimes brusque, say sudden, painful things, as much as the beautiful ones, yeah. So, yeah, so a word like this, then I have to think a lot, and about the ethics. I think for us this week was very interesting in the fact that for the project is written musical in brackets, and then ethics. And we were fighting a lot to put musical ethics in brackets. For me, I have this feeling today, like, because we are musicians. So for us, that's the most important thing in the world. So that made maybe the thing not so easy this week, because we will never go out of this priority, which is the main thing. And then the trust allowed us to maybe sometimes not be in the need to think so much about the ethics. Yeah, maybe that's my statement.
I'm Deep Dreitzen, also known as Dieter Kovacic. My personal background in music is actually not music. I never properly learned any instrument. I never properly learned to read and write scores. I come from playing around with computers, tape machines, and record players, and I come from listening to music, which was mostly the fringe of popular music, I would say. So anything from punk to industrial, and anything from radio art to whatever came along. So I'm someone who never had, who did not start with a theory behind things and learn this theory and then practice it, but rather built my own set of tools, of instruments, of practices, and you could say ethics, you could also say Handwerkszeug in German. So in this musical and ethics lab, the ethics were for me something that I didn't understand at the first place, actually. Ethics is a very specific term when philosophers talk about it. But otherwise, for me, as someone who lives in Austria, it's the thing that kids have to learn in school nowadays if they don't want to go to religion class. So ethics is something you could talk about for a long, long time to define what it is actually. And similar things with improvisation. I'm always just improvising. And I would even dare to say every concert is an improvised concert as long as it's not a playback concert with no interaction at all. So yeah, that's me, and I lost the thread and pass on the microphone.
I've got one. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Deniz Peters. I'm actually also a contemporary free improviser, like all of those colleagues who are sitting around me here. And there you said it, interaction. That was interesting, you said that word. I didn't expect you to say it. Because for me, ethics, for my simple mind, ethics comes into play in the betweenness, so between people, or between me and the environment, or between me and you, between us. Then, there might be some ethical issues or ethical questions or ethical actions, or actions can become ethical or unethical between us. And so my improvisatory practice and research has been, for many years now, not in the large ensembles, but actually in duos and trios with all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds. Historical instruments like the hurdy-gurdy, played with Stevie Wishart. Unique instruments like Paul Stapleton's bonsai sound sculpture, or people who invent their own instruments like you do, building their own practice with a unique setting. Electroacoustic, acoustic, people from jazz, people from Vietnam, playing Vietnamese instruments, etc. So I've been playing in lots of very, very, very different ages. And the interest that I've had in this is what actually happens between us. And the thing that was so exciting about the simple fact that one is playing with someone else is that it becomes, at least in the way that, in my experience, it becomes very personal. It becomes a super, super, super personal thing. So before I was a pianist playing lots of solo stuff, as the pianists often do, the classical pianists, right? It's solo, it's all about me, right? And then, I got sick and tired of this, and as I suddenly discovered for myself, it was like a revelation how much richer it is to play with someone else, because you enter a narrative that is not your own, but it's also not just theirs, but something very, very, something almost spooky can happen, which is you enter an emotional territory together which you don't know, which you wouldn't have entered by yourself, which you didn't even know that was there. And maybe that is something that you also referred to, Angélica, before. Like, when we say beautiful, sometimes we actually mean kitschy. Nobody loves the kitschy stuff, but sometimes the ugly can become beautiful. Yeah, so there's some beauty in ugliness and the other way around. So these things are philosophically probably, but with a simple mind, to have an openness to unexpected things and to uncomfortable things, that is what makes this exciting. But on top of this, to enter a personal, intimate dialogue with someone that you, in my case, don't know for 10 years, but actually know only for 10 minutes, and then you suddenly play with them, and it becomes very personal immediately. And the question is, do I develop trust, and how do I develop trust in this, in the moment? That's been very, very fascinating for me. So my question, and that's a fascinating part of my practice. So now yesterday, Angélica, you said, and I agree, the sounds that you were working with yesterday, or the way that you were organizing the sound yesterday together, it had this magma thing. So it's a metaphor, and it's not, you didn't say, I could hear everybody in this. You said, it's magma. It's a nature metaphor. So my question to the musicians of the ensemble would be, what does the personal mean to you in this situation? Do you actually work with that at all? Do you sometimes hear that somebody else is hearing what you just did in what they are doing? I mean, do you listen out for that was Angélica there, or does it not matter? And do you just go into this, dreamlike state of not knowing who did what, or does it kind of come out, what does the personal dimension of this mean to you? Maybe it doesn't mean anything, but I'm just curious. Maybe it's a question. but first, you're right.
Yeah, hello. I'm Noid, also known as Arnold Haberl. I'm also playing in this Klingt collective. And like Dieter, I was not even very confused about the word ethical music lab, because I didn't really think too much about it, to be honest. I mean, when it comes to ethics and music, I was more thinking of, well, would you play on this or this occasion, like being paid by this or that oligarch or Red Bull, but on the other hand, as an improvising musician, this is not a very emergent question usually. It's a more theoretical question. So it's easy to be on the safe side. But of course, also this interaction between musicians is, it's like juicy with ethical questions, if you like to look at it like that. And there is a lot of things that I would say the International Society of Experimental Improvisers defined as a sort of norm. And there is things that are like personal, and there's things that subgroups define for themselves. But a lot of that is actually, I feel very international. It's really because this scene is very international, and we all collaborate with people from all over the world. And so, but this is more the general. How do we meet? How do we greet? How do we sound check? How do we think? And then of course it's also, I mean, in this interaction thing, I think the easiest interaction you can involve yourself into in an improvising setup is the thing that you can easily observe from the side, that one says hey and the other says hello, and then I say hey, and then this back and forth, which is very simple and I think not so interesting, at least not for myself. I mean, you can make funny games with it, like if you're improvising, there's people running behind you. I always call it like that. So, and then I try to escape them. I mean, this kind of games, or like, yeah, there's all kinds of communication strategies, of course. And actually, it turns out that the not so polite one tend to be the musically more interesting, I think. And then I think that one of the most complex interactions is needed to produce something like one drone together without like much more one sound together like this, because you have to communicate on so many different levels simultaneously, and from the outside it might be very difficult to say what actually happens, but I don't know, that's a question also to you, if you could observe, I mean, and then of course there is a lot of things, a lot of communication going on that produces no result or no visible or audible result. So, I mean, the larger the group gets, I think, the more you have to, well, I'm not sure, I wanted to say the more you have to think about what you're doing, or the more you have to evaluate if it's okay, because if you do everything, it might become a big mess, which is also an option, of course. But what I was trying to say, that there is a lot of decisions you make and then you don't do anything because you decide not to put it on the table. You decide to wait, or you decide you missed the moment, or you decide whatever. A lot of reasons why you don't do, like for Dieter, I just take you as an image, you put a record on the turntable and then you don't play it. And
it happens quite often.
Yes, and it's the same happens for everyone, I think, in the group. Yeah, maybe that's enough.
Maybe say shortly to this question of the personal. To this question you ask about personal, it's again something which is quite relative as this respecting in music. Because the music, for me, it's another level. I mean, even maybe why I like myself music so much is because it frees me from many conflicts which happen in the normal life. And that's why maybe sometimes it's a bit untouchable, could be, yeah. But I wanted to, for me came what experience I had once in a concert where with a colleague as a festival many years ago, and they did this kind of blind date. So you played with somebody you didn't know, you never played before, and I didn't know this person. I knew his work, but a bit, and I was very much looking forward. And then we did sound check, which was not easy because this person has a completely different sound Vorstellung, image of mine. And okay, it was difficult. So we had very different sound situations. And then we played, and it was like, sorry, very good musician, but was playing like with this microphone stand. You know, was no connection at all, no reaction, not looking, nothing. So I'm Latino, so I was a bit like, hey, come on, nothing, no reaction. So I said, whatever. So I go on playing, and he plays, and I play, and we play. And I was like a bit like anxious about this situation, and the people were like, wow, incredible music. Like, it was like super good concert, I don't know. And I was like, oh. What? That's why. You got 2 for the price of 1. No, but just so much about, I think in improvisation, even that is possible, to play with somebody in a very autistic, there's some people were like Derek Belly or something, he was his concept, no? Just like, I play my shit, you play your shit, see you at the end, and Martin is like, this can be as well a musical approach, and it's no personal thing at all. In our situation is, of course, very, very personal, because we are all friends and a group and a community, and it makes music as well very complex, the reaction, the interaction, the emotional thing, and but we try very hard, I think, that it works, to keep these things a bit away, basically, the things which are complex, I think.
Since I still have the microphone, I also join in. And I remember that when we had the lab, there was the discussion about destroying instruments as a musical statement, a musical performance. And then someone asked Susanna, who is unfortunately not being able to join us tonight, how it would be for her to destroy her bass clarinet as a musical or performative, and she was so shocked she couldn't even say that it's not possible. And actually, I also had a discussion yesterday about how it would be to alter the instrument of someone. And for me, I was like, no, I can't do that. Because, I mean, the weird thing is, a lot of the music we play looks very detached, I would say, very cool. But there is a lot of personal research, I mean, we really undress ourselves in a way. And so we build up strategies to protect ourselves. And to protect ourselves, because otherwise we cannot expose so easily. I mean, we need, and that helps sometimes, and then other times it might be limiting also, of course, because it's there was this stupid, well, there's this comparison between like American and Japanese death metal players, and how extreme you can get. And then it turned out the Japanese death metal players could go way more extreme, because they just come from the day job, put on the death metal jacket, and play the death metal concert. Whereas the American death metal players really take it seriously, and it's their life. So of course there is limits, and yeah. So there's different strategies. Maybe.
I was just say 2 things based on the conversations that have just happened. First, just a note. I think it's really interesting that the word, something like respect, can be heard in that way that's supposed to make it all lovely and beautiful. I think one way you can, and maybe this is the philosopher speaking, right? One way in which you can show respect for another person is to challenge them, as it were, to provoke them. But it has to be on the background of trust. I think that's the thought. Otherwise that can be misread and misheard. And I think it's interesting to think in music how much of that is going on, particularly in the kind of improvisational context. And the other concept that, strangely, I haven't heard really brought up much, which sometimes you do when particularly talking to improvising musicians, is the notion of risk and how that works with trust and respect and so on. How much risk you think you're taking in your performance, and when it feels risky, is that when you're not sure that everything's going to coalesce into a kind of form that you can endorse as being what you want to do, or is the risk part of the excitement, part of the sort of delivery of that form? And I think that's a really interesting thing. And on the kind of personal stuff, I do it's a really interesting question, isn't it? I mean, there's these different views about what often is going on in skilled performance of all different kinds. And sometimes people think of it as a very kind of reflective thing, that you're constantly analysing and thinking in that very explicit way about what you're doing. And other people like to think of it as what some people have started calling the flow state or something, where you kind of lose that reflective kind of engagement, but at the same time your open and you're adaptive and you're hearing, but not in that very explicit way where you're thinking about every move. And I suspect obviously it's you guys that know this more than me. I mean, I play music, I play things that have got, choruses and verses and things like that. And but so it's a different kind of game. But I mean, for you, I guess there's this interesting thought about whether you think, how much you think it's a kind of very reflective, and how much you think of it more in this kind of adaptive sort of flow state type thing when you're immersed in it and you're responding in open ways, but without that conscious control, as it were.
I've been discussing exactly this topic with Josh last week, and I also used the term flow for it because I think that's a very crucial point, that as a musician who is performing in this kind of setting, where you're not just playing along and there is no end, but there is a begin and an end, and there is kind of a certain expectation towards you as a performing musician. It's very, very crucial and important and helpful to be able to switch between this state of flow, where you just play along and you really manage to forget and play like a child who doesn't think about anything outside of this little circle. And then also take the perspective, take a step back and look at it and realize you have like 10 minutes till the concert will be over. So I think this is, it's something that I love to play and really try or manage to forget anything else around me. But also you have to have this two possibilities, I think, to successfully perform in this environment.
So I have a question coming back to the ethical side, and one thing I've been exploring a lot, or we've been exploring a lot, is this idea of not having a sharp line between ethics and aesthetics, or actually these are the same things, and that our ethical values are things which are demonstrated in all the choices we make. So the clothes that we wear, or the jobs that we choose, the gigs that we choose not to take because it's sponsored by an oligarch, but all of these things they endorse a value. They kind of, the choices we make say, this is a way to live, this is a way that I want to live. So obviously, reading ethics like that, it blends very easily into aesthetics. You will make certain musical choices because it has a value to it. And so I'm very interested on this theme of beauty. So you explicitly said you go for, or you want to question what is ugly, what is disrespectful. And I'm wondering what those choices you make in the music, what they might say as a value that you have as an artist or as a person. This is for everybody.
Yeah.
We've been discussing that on the review day, with the idea of the punk state of mind that you declare the ugly the new beautiful. And I mean, beautiful is not something that is like predefined and we just accept it. I think also from a practical point of view, to be able to take decisions intuitively, you have to train your sense of beauty and your sense of aesthetic, because I mean, basically, I don't trust too much in an artistic process, I don't trust too much the decisions that are based on taste. And a beauty or not beauty decision is a taste decision. But these decisions are inherently very conservative, I think. Because you would never declare something new that's really new in more than one aspect, I would say. Beautiful, because you're not used to it. You have to, so you have to adjust to your experience. You have to build up an experience that allows you to say, or to actually not say, but to experience something as beautiful. To be able to do to take decisions in like an improvising setup where you usually don't have too much time. I mean, there's difficult mindsets in improvising, but at least you don't have let's say, more than 58 minutes time to think about it if you if you want to play tonight, for instance. So you have to be fast. So there is a certain thing of you have to be fast, so you cannot think it through all the time. So you have to trust in your instincts, in your experience, in your instincts. I said it was intuition I wanted to say, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I was like this, it's very beautiful. It's not so much about the aesthetic of things, or it's true that the words beauty and ugliness are very dangerous, but I use it in this context in purpose just to say like everything is, and that's why music is so special, because even what is allowed in music or in art is not so easily, we cannot do, I mean, let's say if I'm very brutal in music, I can kill somebody and it's okay, no? Or I can be as brutal, but I can do as well, I can create a beautiful landscape, a special landscape, let's say, forget the word beautiful, but a natural moment, organic moment, which reminds a specific state of mind or feelings and la la la, or happiness or sadness, and all these things, it's allowed, and sometimes you can even go over borders of public. That's as well a responsibility, but it's not, you know, you have this freedom to break taboos, to do all these things. So that's more about this, about the expression, and not so much about the aesthetic. And when I use these words, yeah, I think, but yeah, about this idea of thinking fast means that you have the risk to land in our decisions are in milliseconds, all of us at the same time. So we are, like I said yesterday to this lady who didn't like our concert, was a bit angry or that we don't follow the Aufführungspraxis. And I said, yeah, well, but we are landing, we are jumping in the down the cliff without parachute, you know, it's like, and that's very risky. We don't know what will happen, and yeah, can be everything, yeah.
Just a short remark, the word Aufführungspraxis and the reaction of this lady yesterday, I think for me it was very much a cultural thing and not in the sense of general, national, whatever culture, but there is a specific way to, or a specific expectation if you go to a Wien Modern concert. And we were slightly outside of this thing. And this is not just an aesthetical decision of people, but also an aesthetical decision of social groups. And we did not fulfill the specific, I would even say, bourgeois expectation of Aufführungspraxis. And that's why she became a bit angry. And this brings me back to the question of ethics. I think a lot of what we discuss under the word ethics here is actually cultural aspects of behavior. So for me, it's very hard often to distinguish when you say ethics, what's the difference to a general cultural behavior, to a general cultural question, just something that we usually do automatic or however without thinking about it too much. Yeah.
If I can just reply very quickly and then open it up to people who might have questions. So, for example, in anthropology, for a very, very long time, the question of ethics wasn't really posed because from 1918 on, with Durkheim onwards, the idea of how a culture works is that it gives you a map of how you should behave, and therefore morality and ethics equaled culture. And this idea was that you basically followed what you socialized into. But obviously, as like the theories swapped each other, there's this idea like, okay, but how does social change happen at all if cultures are so determining, right? And so at the moment, the way that anthropologists are interested in culture is they look at this sense of striving. What is this constant, like, I could do it this way, I could do it that way, even within a very structured context, choices, even tiny, tiny choices, might plague us for years. Oh, I said that word in that conversation 5 years ago. Fuck, did I offend her? And, you know, or I did this thing in that performance with my colleagues, and should I have kept back? Or so this sense of striving, right? And how do you pick up bits and pieces from here and from there, and how actually cultures are constantly being like bricolaged, brought together from here and there. And I think my question is also to us, whether this is how we experience it. Do we experience ethics as a struggle, or have we sorted ourselves out? But I should be stopping, because my point was to invite questions, not to talk. So.
Übrigens, sprachtechnisch, wenn es Fragen auf Deutsch gibt, dann können viele hier auch Deutsch reden und wir können unter uns übersetzen. Ja? Are there any questions? Are there any questions?
It's not really, hi. It's not really a question, it's more a reflection on the whole situation, because the things you describe where you want to overcome, or for being able to get out of that strict culture you have incorporated while learning music, while learning reading, reflecting on all sorts of social and academic subjects. So this is one way of interaction. But the other interaction, of course, is the performance itself and the audience. And if you want to go over the limits of beautiful or ugly and all that sort of things, you can discuss that inside of the musical range of well-trained musicians. But we, as visual artists, we invite the audience. And I think that this would make a big difference in sound making, because there, of course, there are much more unexpected reactions to be in action. And there you will have a lot to do with ugliness and prejudices. And it would be very interesting to do some research on how a not musical trained collective is working with the language of music. So you can try to get people into it in some way, not teaching, of course. And then there will be a lot of new experiences. Ugliness, not trainedness, and sort of things.
It felt like there were a lot of questions / themes in there, so I'll just pick one small one out, and that was a question of how did you say it? Letting the audience in.
Yeah.
Letting the viewer in. It's funny you say that, because when we were discussing this business of beauty, I was going to add my little Beitrag, which is. Once, when I was young and bold, and people would ask me, what kind of music do you make? And I was making this kind of music, more or less, back then too. And I would say, I make ugly music. Because I wanted them to ask me, well, why, right? And since then, I don't say that so often anymore. But I also ask myself, am I really often making beautiful music? And over the years, you know, the concept of beauty has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, where I'm not really thinking about it in terms of prettiness, but in kind of more higher order terms, right? What is the good in an aesthetic sense, right? And to me, I guess the thing that kind of binds that together is usually, you know, beautiful music for me is music that invites me in. Somehow, and sometimes that can be this can be with very kind of nasty, abrasive gestures or sounds or forms, but maybe they let you in another way because they invite you to go in the back door, or because you have to move toward it or away in order to get in a way that you don't expect. So, of course, that changes a lot from context to context, right? But I think it leaves the aesthetic possibilities quite open while still maintaining a certain ethical standard, let's say, in the musical praxis.
Just shortly, again, for me, I want to go back to these words, beauty and ugliness, because as I said before, it's more about the surprises happening, which are not going with our own expectancies or the ones of the public. And because you said inviting the public to do with, and it will be ugly or something. There are two examples for me which show that this not even a question, because there's one, is the composer Cornelius Cardew. He was working only with amateurs, and this was the big aim, and this music became a very specific, fantastic music, let's forget the word beautiful, but with all the range of things. And me, I might say, I have been improvising with children a lot in my life, and I'm a recorder teacher teaching the worst instrument, blockflöte, I love recorder, I'm very proud of that, but these moments could be like super tricky, improvising with Volksschulklasse, improvising on the sopran recorders. Believe me, that sounds, yeah, you know. But I have experience with these children extremely magical. I have my best recordings of musicians improvising is, I don't want to elevate children or special, it's really, the thing is like this natural working with sound. And so for me, it's not an issue. I mean, I have done this as well. And with public, then it becomes another social component, which for me wouldn't be so interesting for the way I see music, because it lost the intimacy. And I need intimacy for making this music. That's very, very important.
Yeah, Josh was asking me, maybe he was asking everybody, we didn't talk about what he was asking in the group, but how I think it's possible, or if I think it's possible to teach improvisation, and I think it's a bit related to that, and my personal view is it's kind of difficult. I mean, it's possible, but it's difficult, and I came up with this analogy that it's a bit far-fetched, but I would call myself a Catholic atheist, because you have to know what not to believe in. And I think it's very similar with music and with the expectations. And I mean, there is something you can maybe only achieve with amateurs who are not trained, but how far do you get? I mean, I think this is just moments, because you need a sort of structured approach to sound. And so, and our perception is only fine, has only a good resolution in the things we spend time with. I think if we work a lot with sound and with differences and with details, we get a much higher resolution on this parameter. And to go further, you need some material to work with, and so I think that the resolution part is a big thing in that.
Maybe just to add, I have made the very same experience that with people who are not trained musicians, or not even routined untrained musicians, but really somebody who's kind of only doing stuff for themselves and then suddenly playing with me, there might be these moments of very high resolution. They're unstable, yeah. So people aren't able to reproduce or maintain or anything, but they happen, and that's quite fascinating. They happen, although you think the skill isn't there. Yeah. What I was going to say, thank you for raising this. I don't know about your practice, because you're saying, okay, you're involving the audience. I was thinking yesterday, actually, maybe I should do this thing where for a year or so, every fortnight, I say, whoever wants to play with me, I'm there Friday, I don't know, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Just let me know. And we do a duo, okay? Offer to everyone here.
I'm coming.
Yeah, so yes, it could be really interesting to open up that practice that we usually establish between a select group of people to audience.
Susanna Gartmeier, who unfortunately can't be here tonight.
Does that, I'm sure she does it.
And she does exactly this. They have a thing called the Monday Improvisers Session, which is an open format. It's not a random jam with anybody, but it's an open format where you can just come, bring your instrument and say, I'm here, I want to play. And groups will be put together and play on stage. So that's one format that works very well since 15 years now or something, like quite a while, every Monday in Celeste, if anybody wants to join. And yeah, just wanted to add this. Unfortunately, she cannot be here and explain it because she's sick, but yeah.
Yeah, I live in the province in Graz. So.
There is a similar thing in Graz. I think it's still existing.
Improvisers Orchestra.
No. Patrick Wurzwallner runs a concert series in the Forum Stadtpark. It's not Monday, but it's Monday also. Okay, yeah. So he knows.
I don't mean to break up the party, but we are coming to the end of our hour, and I'm wondering if anybody has any final burning question.
I wanted to answer.
Can I see if there's anybody else who has a burning question before? No? No? Please go ahead.
So what I meant was not exactly what you were responding. It was very interesting for me. What I meant was the aspect, the more philosophical part of the arts where democracy is on the stake. I mean, you open up in between you and with music as language, with practice and all the reflections around that. But there is the audience always, not always, but there are the people, and you are sort of making a field experience in between you as a certain type of people. And the people are the musicians, I mean. And but it has to do with that opening up and the reflections on ethics. It has to do with the society nowadays and what we bring in. And so that thing we want to bring in is not only based on music. That's what I mean with me as an artist. I tried to make something I never could find the place and do it really. It would be interesting. Something where I can invite the people to reflect also with their sound and with their voice and with their taking an instrument on my paintings. But a lot of things around that. I was interested in that reflection of what is democracy in our way of living in arts.
I'm sure that each person here will have a very different answer to that question. What is democracy? So I can just say, for me, I mean, I don't use the word democracy almost in my work, because I see it really like that's really the now is not even collective. It's like when I play even in a collective, I see this like let's say a painting which is there, or a building, like I said yesterday. We build a building which will collapse in the applause, and it's very ephemeral, I don't know, yeah, there can be a discussion, of course. There's always wine afterwards, and I'm always happy to discuss. Maybe that will be my democracy. But more, I cannot even begin with some, yeah, that's it.
Any last concluding thoughts here from the folks on the stage?
Let's rock.
See you shortly. Thanks for coming.